Good morning. My name is Cor. I'm on the pastoral staff here at Hope. Wanted to make you aware of something. We have long partnered with a ministry called New Life Family Services. For those who don't know, this month is Sanctity of Human Life Month, and many churches around the nation will celebrate the ministry of New Life and those who come alongside moms and dads who are facing an unplanned pregnancy. It is the longest standing partner ministry we have at Hope, going way back into the late 90s when we were at the University of Minnesota. And the statistics are sobering. 1 in 4 women will have an abortion by the age of 40. And New Life comes alongside those facing this unexpected bit of news to provide holistic care. It is to help them face what could be the most difficult moment of their lives, and to do so with compassion and kindness and grace, and to help share the number of options that are available to them. So New Life has a number of programs. First Care are those that are going to provide services of ultrasounds and counseling and help those who are really at a loss. It turns out that most having an abortion don't want to. They just don't feel like there's any other option. And so First Care is there to provide holistic care, not just to get baby born, but to care for young families. And if there's needs for clothing or diapers, to come alongside them for the long haul. There's also an opportunity to adopt or to place for adoption through New Life Family Services. They are a licensed adoption agency. And then Conquerors deals with helps people who've undergone and experienced abortion as part of their story and might need to find healing and might be struggling in the wake of that. I've had the honor of serving with this ministry. They, as part of their program, will have a memorial service in which they symbolically place their child or children in the hands of the Lord. And I've been invited into that space to provide words of grace and reminders of truth in that space. And so if you would want to be involved in this ministry, there's a few different ways you can do so. I'm on the prayer text. I get prayers texts when they have a need, when a need arises. So there's different ways to pray for the ministry, to give financially in an ongoing way, whether as a life sustainer or through different, I guess somebody donated a crib, a brand new crib at in between services here. So we're thankful for that. Or spread the word. You might be somebody who's in need of their services. You might know someone who is in need of the services that New Life provides. And so feel free. We'll have a couple of staff members downstairs after, a couple Hopesters that are also staff members that'll be downstairs to answer any questions you might have, help you get connected. This week and last week, we're spending the first 2 Sundays of the new year highlighting the vision of our church, Hope Community Church downtown. There's only a couple problems. The first is that when I got to the building last week, Steve, who was set up to preach, greeted me not with Happy New Year, but with an apology. He said, "I'm sorry." And I was like, "What's going on, man?" And he said, "I'm not really doing the vision thing." I was like, what? He goes, "Yeah, I just got some things I want to say." It's like, what is that? We agreed. We said you'd do part of the vision, and then the only other issue is that I'm not supposed to be preaching right now. This is supposed to be Davis preaching this week. So his wife Emma decided to have baby early. Davis was scheduled to preach next week, but just to be safe, we moved it to this week to ensure that there'd be no problems preaching this week. So here we are. I'm preaching and wasn't planning on it, and I get to preach all the vision, all the things that we were going to talk about over the course of 2 weeks, just today. So you see what I have to work with? You see this? You pray for me. Work with these guys. So what are we going to do today? Couple things. We're going to look at a timeline of Hope Community Church downtown. We're going to hit some of the major events and significant timeline realities, as well as simultaneously highlighting some of the things that make Hope Hope, that are characteristic of our church. Some of these are things that we have intentionally tried to bring forth. Other times it's been reflected back to us like, oh, we found hope and made it our home because of this. And we're like, because of that? And they're like, yeah, because of that. We're like, oh, great. Okay, sounds good. So we're going to hit both some dates, kind of go through and hit some of our distinctives. So I found on Canva a 10-stop timeline, and so we're going to make 10 stops. I think 11 would have been better, but no, that was too tough to figure out. So 10 stops on this journey today. First stop, hope began in 1996 at the University of Minnesota. 7 couples who were part of a young marrieds class at Bethlehem Baptist Church left there and started Hope right on the campus of the University of Minnesota. The building we used to meet in and worship in that I have so many fond memories is gone. They tore it down and I don't know, built some housing. So I knock on doors like, hey, I need a time in this space of your house. Can I stay for a little bit? They don't like that. But we met on the campus of the University of Minnesota. There was tons that they loved from that previous church, the gospel-centeredness, the Bible-centeredness. But Trike hits different. So he was looking for a different wrapping paper, a different culture maybe, to highlight all of that God-centeredness and Bible-centeredness. And so they started Hope back in 1996. The vision was and remains to honor God by helping as many people as possible become fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Number 1, honor God. It's about him and not us. All we do, hopefully, is to bring him honor and glory and praise. We want to help as many people as possible because Hope is about numbers? No. We just want as many worshipers for Jesus. We want that kind of throne filled to capacity when we enter into glory. So yeah, help as many people as possible. Become fully devoted followers. Not just praying a prayer one time or going through conversion, as important as those might be. We want people to be fully devoted followers in all areas of their life. That this actually would intersect with your work or school, your family relationships, with your roommates, your neighbors, at the office. We want all of our lives to be dedicated to Jesus. A significant passage that we've preached on and cited many times comes from Isaiah 57. It will be said, build up, prepare the road, remove the obstacles out of the way of my people. For this is what the high and exalted one says. He who lives forever, whose name is holy. I live in a high and holy place, but also with the one who is contrite and lowly in spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite. In the lead up to planting Hope Community Church, Trike had this moment, this epiphany of that's what I want this church to be about. Removing obstacles, caricatures of Christianity, bad examples, right? So that a road can be paved, that people can journey down and hear a clear presentation of who Jesus is. That cross that hangs on the wall behind me represents rescue and salvation for you, for me, for us. And so that's what Hope has been about. This actually became codified through a song. We actually sang a song, build up, prepare the way. The Lord is making peace today, bringing his people home to stay. Remove every obstacle from their way. It was just part of our liturgy, part of our songs that we would sing, and it reminded us that that's what we want to be about. Preparing a way, preparing a road, so that many people might be able to experience God's goodness, God's grace. From the beginning, we've also prioritized the gospel. We want to keep the main thing the main thing. Church can be about many things, many good things, but we would never want to lose the gospel. We preach it every Sunday. We change up the passage or the verses to confuse you a little bit, throw you off the scent, but we preach the gospel every Sunday, every week. 1 Corinthians 15 says this, by this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise you have believed in vain. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. Now someday, when I'm face to face with Paul in heaven, I'm going to ask so if it was of first importance, why'd you put it in chapter 15? That's beside the point. He says it is of utmost importance that you hear this, that you know this, that Christ died, was buried, and raised 3 days later. And so we need that to be the main thing. About this, Tim Keller says, because the gospel is endlessly rich, it can handle, and I would say it alone can handle the burden of being the one main thing of a church. The gospel, the good news. Jesus lived, died, and was raised. And that has consequences, ramifications for your life. Even for some of you who wandered in here and you don't feel like that cross or that Jesus has anything to do with you. Yes, it screams his love and his forgiveness and his compassion for you. And one of our core values we kind of put that in there, that we just want to be reminded of this. And so one of our core values of being by God's grace, we write this: the grace of God shall permeate all we do. We acknowledge that our only hope is for a restored relationship with God is through the grace given to us at the cross of Jesus Christ. We will operate in a spirit of grace and humility and will allow ourselves to be broken over our own sin. One pastor says it this way: a church without the broken is a broken church. A church without the broken is a broken church. You might come in here and incorrectly believe that everybody else has it together. They don't. We don't. That's a charade. We might give you the impression that we have it all put together. We have all figured out. We don't. And yeah, you probably don't either, but that's okay. We are a church of broken people in need of grace, in need of the gospel. So important that you realize that I don't stand on stage just, an oak of righteousness, a beacon of holiness, Oh, I'm so glad they came to hear. No, I stand up here amidst a broken people as a broken person, as a broken leader and preacher. We believe that all of our staff, all of our leaders, all of our small groups, we all need God's grace. Pastor Steve has often said that the ground in front of the cross, it's level. There aren't tiers. There's not tiers where if you get to a certain level of Christian spirituality, you get like a certain plateau. And then you kind of forego having to really be super godly because you reach that. No, level ground in front of the cross. All of us need to be recipients of his grace. And so I want to just ask. I'm going to ask you 4 questions this morning. The first one, will we keep the gospel the main thing? Because we don't come in, from that kind of cold with just oozing a heart of it's just gospel, it's all gospel. No, I have self-interest. I want one of my kids to move to Florida, so I have a good reason to move to Florida, okay? And we can come into community with, at best, mixed motivations for friendship or encouragement. You might come in having certain needs that you want the community to meet. And amidst all of that, will we continue to keep the main thing, that it's about the gospel, about his grace, his love. That's what binds us together. We're very different people, but yet having that in common. Number 3, small group community. Community is our middle name, Hope Community Church. Super funny joke that got old after the first 3 years. But we keep coming back to the value of small group community. Not that it necessarily has to be a Hope Community small group, but just that you are in a group of people that know you and that you can be known by and get to know them. We've utilized Hebrews 10 that speaks of this important quality. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope, it says, without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. We each are tempted to get out of habit meeting together. And as I kind of have now entered in my 20th year of pastoral ministry, I get a front row seat to tons of what God is doing that I can rejoice in and celebrate, get so excited about. But there's also a front row seat to some disasters. And many times someone walking away from the faith is precipitated by walking away from community. And so is it a responsibility that you have to be in community? You can make that argument. But I really want to sell you on the value of being in small group community, to know and be known, to have people that care about you, look after you, that want you there, look forward to you showing up. Small groups are arguably the best expression, we've said, of the smaller community amongst the large. They are a place to know and be known, to grow in your relationship with God through being in relationship with other believers, to study his word, and to fight sin together through prayer and accountability. One person put it this way: because friends model the love of Jesus to me in ways that remind me I'm loved by our great God and help bring a joy and richness to life that is missing in aloneness. Why do community? Because of that. Because there's something in aloneness, and I know that's in vogue right now, kind of like, yeah, I'm spiritual, and I kind of do my own thing, and it's like Lone Ranger Christianity. That's an oxymoron. Those do not go to, we are built for community. And there's just something about somebody being a physical, tangible, audible expression of God's grace each week that will help you. I think it's undeniable. It will help you. Now, an hour before small group starts, before you're supposed to, pack up, put on the clothes, the layers, and leave for small group, there's no spiritual warfare like it. I mean, it's just intense. And it comes very gentle through like, wouldn't you like to just stay in those pajamas that you put on at 4 o'clock when you got home from work? Right? That's how the enemy works, right? And I might have a resistance to that. And yet, undeniably, I come out of those times, I'm like, I'm so glad. I'm so glad I have this people. I'm so glad I have this group. I'm so glad I have the opportunity to meet with others that care about me. In our last survey, we saw a connection between small group involvement and feeling connected as part of Hope Community. Now, I do want to highlight that there are people who are not in a small group that still feel connected at Hope, right? And there are people who are in a small group that might feel a smaller degree of connection. But by and large, small group can be a key piece to feeling connected to the community. So I want to encourage you with that. Elsa put this on social media. I asked her permission to use it like 3 years ago, but I'm going to use it again. I think it still holds, right? 7 years, I think I get to use it. She said this: the best decision that I made in 2020 was to join a small group at my church. It's when this church really began to feel like home after going for a while. So grateful for each of these people in this group, our leaders, and the way these people point me toward God. So again, it doesn't have to be a Hope small group, but find a small group. Find a group of people that you're willing to meet with weekly, to encourage one another, to know and be known, to point each other to Jesus. So we got the gospel, we got community, and at this point, let's say it's about 1999, the church was going to make it. First 5 years of a church plant can be dicey. Just like, are we going to have enough money, enough people to make it worth it, keep coming back? 1999, they said yes. They looked around, they were like, okay, let's take stock, let's do an inventory. What do we got? We don't have a building, right? We're renting space, it's not ours. We don't have a lot of money, a lot of young people, not deep pockets, shallow pockets, very shallow pockets. I chipped in the $3 that I came in with each week. But they said, we got young people. So let's invest in discipling them, raising them up, coaching them. And so we started some formal leadership development efforts called LDI to equip and raise up leaders. We did this informally through classes and seminars and retreats, but formally we started the LDI program. Why? There are many reasons, but it was an opportunity to be faithful what God had put in front of us as a church. And so what if we invested in this group? Perhaps a catalyst was Acts 4, verse 13. Love this. They're noticing the ministry of Jesus in the wake of his resurrection, and this is what they observed. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. Like, I don't know what you're putting on your CV, your resume about how great you are, how skilled, how much you might add to that company. But I'm guessing You're not going to put, you know what? I'm pretty ordinary. I'm unschooled, but I've been with Jesus, right? We love that is like the spiritual resume of the disciples, of the early church. Are they highly schooled? No. Are they talented? No. But they've been with Jesus. Oh, yes, they've been with Jesus. That's all they needed. And I just love that. And a lot of our leadership development efforts haven't been too far from that. Just like, do we need the mighty and the highly affluential? Do we need the rich? Do we need the highly educated? Like, no, just an openness to learn, to sit at the feet of Jesus, to be shaped by his ministry and his message. And so we have formalized that into internships, into residencies, but also classes, seminars, retreats. You might think, I want to do a retreat. You missed it. It's happening right now. There's a winter retreat happening. All of us, it's no FOMO. It's just Mo. We missed out on it. We don't have a fear of it. It happened. You don't need to be afraid of it. So, but they're over in Wisconsin having a retreat. And so we would love for all of you to think about your development as a follower of Jesus. We're going to put classes and seminars, internships, and retreats out there in front of you. So we got the gospel, we got small group community of some form or fashion, we got leadership development, and we also have a desire to see God's kingdom go forth. And so we want to go into the kingdom of darkness and trash the joint. I mean, Pastor Steve, there might be many things you get known for, but this might be your best ever quote here. Is it a Trike original? Did you? It is. Oh my goodness, folks, write this down. Have them sign your little worship folder. That would be great. But we just want to see God's kingdom go forth, for churches to get started, for missions to take place. And one of the impetus of this comes from Matthew 16. It says, Jesus is quizzing his disciples, what about you? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So Hope started Mission 1618, which is a take on Matthew 1618. This idea that Jesus is faithful. Jesus is faithful to build his church, and the gates, the defensive gates of Hades will not overcome it, which is to say Jesus and his message are on the offensive here. And we just have this idea of blasting open those gates, going into the kingdom of darkness with the gospel and trashing the joint, which is to say proclaim the gospel so others might be rescued through that message. We've never aimed to be a large church. We have become sizable. We're not a mega church. We're not a small church. We're in that mini mega status, which is weird. But in that, we've believed forever that 10 churches of 100 are to be preferred over one church of 1,000. Let's get lots of expressions of the gospel. And so with God's grace, we've had a chance to help 11 other local churches get started, 2 of which are locations of hope. So Lower Town was started in 2015 and Columbia Heights in 2019. But all the other churches are independent. They went. They are doing their own thing. Most of them in the 494, 694 loop, except for Providence, which was started in 2007. They're in Cross Lake, cabin country. So if you're up north and need a service, look up Providence. But why? Why church planting? Why send people overseas or locally to start new expressions of the gospel, new churches? I'm going to rely on Tim Keller. He says this. The vigorous, did it freeze again? Oh, there it is. The vigorous continual planting of new congregations is the single most crucial strategy for, number one, the numerical growth of the body of Christ in any city, and number two, the continual corporate renewal and revival of the existing churches in a city. Nothing else. Not crusades, outreach programs, parachurch ministries, growing megachurches, congregational consulting, nor church renewal processes will have the consistent impact of dynamic, extensive church planting. This is an eyebrow-raising statement, but to those who have done any study at all, it is not even controversial. We want to see more churches get started. We want more expressions of the gospel. Locally, internationally, we want to continue to send people out. And that's tough. There are times where I'm like, ew, I don't know if I want to see that group, those leaders, those friends leave. I kind of like them. I kind of want them to stick around. It's difficult to send people away. And yet, for God's glory, for the message of Christ, that it's not about us, but it's about him. And so continuing to send people near and far with that message. So I want to pause again to ask another question. Will we keep the main thing, the gospel? But in the midst of small group community or leadership development or church planting, I want to ask, will we always have room for one more? Will we always have room for one more in our small group? Will you always maintain an empty chair so that a coworker, a friend, a roommate, a family member might join you? In all of our classes, and it's like there are times where we put full on something and I'm like, do we have to? And they're like, we have to tell the camp. I'm like, I just never want any room to be full, any class, any retreat. Always having room for one more. And maybe even, do we have room for one more church to get started, to be planted, to be sent out from Hope? It's not easy, but it is worth it. Step 6, we outgrew our space at the University of Minnesota. We rented some space for a time, but eventually we needed to find a new home for Hope. And so we set off to do that. And it was a God thing, total God thing, because we know that it wasn't based on our fancy advertising and marketing or clip art that we used to get a new home for Hope. Hey, I was really kind with the saying there, going to the kingdom and trash the darkness. This is not your best effort. This is not your best work. But we needed a home, okay? We had outgrown that space and tried some things and it wasn't working. And so, in the midst of that, one of our elders, and we don't know, it's debated on which elder it was and who was that said it, but one of the elders said, we don't need money, we need a building, let's pray for a building. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right. I mean, what? That's crazy. Why would you say that? We don't need money, we need a building, pray for it. Why would you do that? I just was so pessimistic, skeptical. And then God gave us a building. It was like so wild. So as the story goes, the previous tenants, the previous occupants of what we call Hope West, the building next door, is a church named Central Evangelical Free. They had been only the second occupant of that building in its 100 plus years. They were coming to the end of their life cycle and they voted to close and it did not pass a congregational vote. They ended up trying to merge with a church in Uptown, got some traction, kind of fell apart, and so they were open to the prospect of closing again. But this time around, some relationships had developed, some conversations that had taken place. And one of the leaders said, hey, what if, instead of just voting to close, as part of that, you offered this sanctuary and these facilities to Hope Community Church, to this younger church meeting at the University of Minnesota that needs a building. And we were not a part of their denomination. And despite that, it passed a local congregational vote, it passed a regional Midwest vote, and then it passed a national vote to give this, significant part of this property to us, which could have been seen from like a financial lens or some other vantage point, but they viewed it through a sacred lens, a ministry lens, that God's name could keep being worshiped in that space as they granted us, 50% ownership at the time for free and about 80% occupancy of that building. We don't need money. We need a building. Let's pray for a building. And God just showed up and he's like, I got you, Hope. I got you. I was stunned. So praise God for that good word. And I think this was a season where we learned we cannot outgive God. 2 Corinthians 9:8 says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. You can't outgive God. We had felt like we had given to God with sending people out with church plants, but God would backfill. And this idea that like, oh, well, we've done so much, and it's just like, you have no idea what God is able to make abound, not just through his gospel and his message, but just in his divine wisdom. And so on the floor, underneath the carpet next door, someone spray painted "All for the Glory of God." Did we do that here? Did that get spray painted here? Do you know, Drake? So just next door is "For God's Glory." Here, it would make for a good story. Let's just say we won't tear this up for another 100 years. So yeah, both sanctuaries, but it's a way of just reminding us. This building, God giving it to us having the opportunity to continue gospel ministry, is just for his glory. Stop 7. As part of moving downtown, moving out of campus, there was a strong impression that to be engaged in the city would mean we need to partner with people who are engaged in the city. We talked about blessing the city, or sometimes we use language of redemption of the city, but we knew we couldn't reinvent the wheel. We couldn't do all the things. We would have to rely on people that were already here and were doing things. And so we partnered with a number of ministries. Some of those have come and some have gone, but a lot of this springs from Jeremiah 29, where it says this: build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. At bare minimum, I just need to remind us that the context of this is, these are actually words of judgment towards God's people. Why? Because he had booted them out of the promised land due to disobedience. And they were thinking, this is going to be temporary. We'll time down to Florida and back during the winter, and then we'll get back into the promised land. It wasn't like that. There was judgment, and they were exiled. They were cast out. And so this is God saying, it's not going to be quick. You need to take up residence. You need to plan to be here for the long haul, and therefore seek the peace and prosperity of the city. You're going to be here, and so if it prospers, you too will prosper. So seek the welfare of the city. We've tried to have a similar mindset. Not all of the organizations and businesses have Jesus at the heart of their vision. And so we've tried to partner with ministries, both of Christian persuasion, but not always. Some don't maybe have that as their primary goal, and yet we really do want to bless the city. And some of that does come down to urban housing. And sometimes, like I mentioned, crisis pregnancies, or sometimes it means education in the city. Most of them have an impulse of gospel to them. And yet realizing, golly, there's so many needs in the city. God, what might you do? And so we've tried to partner with ministries that we feel like could be a blessing, seeking the peace and prosperity of the city. Step 8, so we move off campus downtown. We try to partner and bless the city. One of the things that also happened that we didn't necessarily foresee was there was a group of people that kind of saw Hope as a campus church, just a college church, and moving downtown, moving off campus, all of a sudden it like caused a little bit of an awareness that, Hope is it's just a church. It's not just a campus church, it's a church. And there was a season where we've tended to experience steady growth, not like dramatic growth, but steady, consistent growth. And we maybe had a little inflection point where the population grew pretty quick. We talked about riding the tsunami, that this was a stage in which the tsunami of church and ministry and people, it just was a lot at that time. And staff and leaders had to intentionally remind one another, this is a good thing. God's on the move. There's so much to manage. There's so much. I got so much work. And this is a good thing. It's a God thing. It's okay. Now, we knew we didn't have all the systems in place to retain all the numbers of people, but it was a lot. It was too much. There was struggle and there was challenge. Maybe you've heard this expression. You might actually have it on your wall. Beautiful crochet. The expression is this: God will not give you more than you can handle. False. It's just like, what? Who Who coined that phrase? That'd be great if that were true. Just everything that comes to me, I'm just like, yeah, I got it. No, it's a piece of cake. It's like, no, this was more than we could handle. I'm reminded of 2 Corinthians 12. 3 times, Paul said, I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me, that this thorn in the flesh should be taken. But God said, my grace is sufficient. My grace is enough for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content. How? In weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. Does that sound like, oh yeah, I got that, I can handle that? No, this is like too much. And Jesus saying, yes, in all those things, my grace is sufficient for you. In your weakness, in your incapacity, inability, I'm enough for you. And for us to just be reminded of that, because it did feel like a tsunami. We were not controlling it. It was throwing us at times. And yet God's grace proving again and again, he is sufficient. And so whatever you might be experiencing in your life that can feel overwhelming or tsunami-like, or you being carried away, or maybe you're just like, I know God's working, but I don't understand it. Reminding each other, God's grace is sufficient. His grace is sufficient. His grace is sufficient for me in my time of need. His power is made perfect amidst my weakness. One of the other changes, not just kind of this inflection within the church, but truly beyond the church walls, feels like the pace of culture quickened. Some of the challenges, some of the ways that we converse publicly changed quite a bit. And so we have taken time since then to talk about that. The Waters in Which We Swim was a great sermon series in which we looked at things like politics and money and education. We've looked at, in our Made for God series, things like identity, sex, and gender. Hey, I have a question. We talked just answering questions that came to us from the community, from you guys. One about this, one hopester said, I like how Hope isn't afraid to talk about hot cultural topics. I think this helps to diffuse some of the divisiveness. Some people will say it's too much. Others will say it's too little. If that happens, you're probably in the right spot. So this person says, since that quote and since the Cultural Waters sermon series, we've been through a pandemic. We've been through a race event that happened in our city that had shockwaves around the world, the death of George Floyd. We've had conservatives and liberals going toe-to-toe, and truly everything now has become politicized, that there's very few environments that don't have some political, seemingly, connection. To the point where I want to preach the Bible, and I might preach a passage from the Bible that sounds blue. And so I might get critiqued not for preaching the Bible, but for preaching something that sounds liberal. I might grab onto a passage that sounds red, might sound conservative. And I will often get kind of pitched at, oh, you're just one of those conservative preachers. And I wanted to preach the Bible. And so even the pulpit will get viewed through that political lens. And I want to highlight the example of a hopester that encouraged me in the midst of this. We did have, with the pandemic, decisions about how we were going to handle that and what we were going to do and open or not open. If we open, what is that going to mean? And kind of that ripple effect that most of your businesses, organizations that you're part of had. We had that too. And in the midst of that, being on phone calls with different medical people and different leaders at Hope, and not really clearly knowing, like, oh, this is the right answer, these 3 steps, and then you figured it out, meeting as a church amidst the pandemic. And we did have medical people at Hope that leaned liberal and conservative, and in some cases made the decision to move on from Hope for maybe some of this decision-making and beyond. One person who I know disagreed with me, because she told me, and I thank her for having the strength and courage to just be like, I think you're wrong. But here's the deal. She's still here. She influenced me. She impacted my decision-making amidst that, for sure, absolutely without question. And yet, I was not in lockstep with the decision she would have made for our community. But that disagreement didn't result in her leaving. Now, friends, there's a time to stay at a church and a time to go. I acknowledge all of that in the midst of this. But I'm honored that she stayed. And I was going to keep her anonymous, but then she raised her hand at the early service. She's like, I'm right here. I'm like, oh, okay. I wasn't going to, like, okay, But as I look out, I know people that I've had disagreements with in shepherding and decision making. Like we have our disagreements. And some of you stay. And it really does, in that way, feel like family life. That we don't have to be lockstep on every single decision, agree with every single piece. And actually, we stay in the midst of those disagreements. And that makes for, I think, a pretty special community. I'm really thankful for her example in that. So amidst the tsunami, we're doing all life and all things church. And when we got that building, I remember Steve being so excited. He's like, I'll be able to retire. That's my last building campaign. We got the building. And then we, had multiple services and had like a 7 p.m. night service. And then we're filling the aisles. And then we actually had an overflow group in the community room. Any of you worship in the community room in the basement? I mean, what a terrible service. Like bad lighting. You can hear the band upstairs, but then you're getting it through the speakers. It doesn't make for great experience worshiping. But we had need for more space. We are scheduled to go on a retreat, to pray about this, talk about this, okay, as a leadership team. That morning, the gal who my wife does childcare for says, hey, have you heard about Augustana Lutheran? I'm like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? She said, well, I think they're going through some stuff and they might be looking for like a new owner of their building. They might sell their building. And I'm like, no, like that can't be God's answer. That seems on the same block of downtown, a church is at a point where they're ready to vacate their space and we are on the same block and we need a little bit more. Like it can't be that seamless. I mean, I know God gave us that building. That was like a big once in a lifetime type thing, but like, no way, right? And Hope East, the building that we sit in, it was a blessing to be in relationship. It was, a little bit of a roller coaster as you try to figure out the purchase and the acquisition of this, but in God's grace, he said, here. And so we had the opportunity to renovate to this space. I just remember people up in the balcony up there for hours pulling staples. Like, where's that carpet going to go? Like, why do we need 1,000 staples over the course of 3 feet? That seems a bit much. I don't know so this stage, a lot of this space, the lobby, the downstairs, it seemed like every part of this building got touched and renovated, and it was tough. It took a toll. And again, even as leaders, as staff, it took a toll. And you start grumbling and commiserating. And in the midst of that, Suzanne Dubé, she just prophetically, poignantly says, amidst, I'll say it for myself, my grumbling and complaining heart, she says, God cares more about who we are becoming during this process than us completing this renovation project. And ever since that point, it's not about us. It's about God. It's about his glory. It's about what he's doing in our midst, in us as a spiritual people, way more than the physical. And we've had the opportunity to worship in this space. Huge blessing. And to do ministry out of 2 buildings, both built in the 1800s. Imagine that. Who would have planned that? Who would have forecasted that? So where does that leave us? Step 10, a belief, a firm belief that God is still moving. And that can be spoken generally, kind of fun Christian speak. God is on the move. This actually is a quote from Dr. Bill Berg, who preached seated in his chair right around here as the baton was passed from Augustana Lutheran to Hope Community. And he preached at age 101. And with a booming voice, he just said, God is moving. And man, I take that to heart. And Jesus, even as we talked as leaders and staff this fall, just like, it does feel like something's a little bit different. Can't put our finger on it. And so it really is a belief in faith that God is moving. How so? Don't know exactly, not for sure. We got some ideas, we got some things. But it feels like God is moving in our midst. And we as a people are trying to keep following after him and his spirit. I did want to share part of our story and some of these distinctives because a lot of you are new, at least according to survey data. Maybe a fourth have been coming a year or less, half in the last few years. And so we want to keep reminding people that God's been at work in this community. God has been at work in and through our best efforts, and maybe despite our best efforts at times, just like, no, I got something better. I got something better planned for you, right? And so we want people to know this story and not just know it, but engage with it. I want to invite you. Will you engage in the story that God is writing through Hope Downtown? He continues to write new pages. And so when you see maybe in a newsletter, or maybe you want to get the newsletter, or you see these different ways to serve and connect, maybe take a step. I made the decision to cut up donuts and make coffee. And that one decision, not to blow it out of proportion, like changed my life. I got to know some of the leaders, get enfolded in this community. They would later hire me. I've now been doing it for 20 years. It's like my life is different. Why? A small decision to cut up donuts allowed me to get to know some people at a deeper level. And so will you engage with this story? And I just got one more thing from Pastor Steve. It's part of starting the church. And I want to make sure that we all know Treichler's rule of law number 1. How many laws are there, bro? Just one. Okay. People do that which is fun. That's his only rule of law. That's his only rule, And so, are you ready to have fun in 2024? I hope church is fun. We all know boring church, right? I don't know if any of us want to be a part of boring church. So what does it look like to have fun? To keep the main thing, to always have room for one more to let into the fun, and to engage God's story that he's writing through us as a community. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for your faithfulness. No one could have predicted, nobody would have ever scripted this kind of story. Starting at the U of M, jumping across the river into one and then a second old building, to have the opportunity to plant a number of churches, to see dozens and dozens, hundreds of leaders raised up. God, this is your work, not ours. It is for your glory, not ours. And so for the people of Hope that have made this their home, that they would really feel a part of this family, that this story would not just be the story of the church, but their story. They share in this. And maybe, God, some will make the decision to make this their church home, seeing your faithfulness, seeing your goodness, seeing that it's about you, and that they might have opportunity to grow closer to you through their time here. God, we thank you for all that you've done, all that you are for us. We worship you. May this be a happy, joyous new year full of your gospel. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.